I'm David from Learn Stage Lighting. Now that we've talked about networking basics and talked about some of those details, terms, and gear that you need to know for a basic network in stage lighting, I want to take the gear right here that I've got in front of me and illustrate some basic networking setups that you might run into. Okay, to also illustrate, I have a LightShark lighting console here as my networking device. We're just going to ignore, I'll just unplug this antenna on the front, and we're going to consider this, for the sake of today's examples, a lighting console that has network capability, either to connect wirelessly to a bigger network, which it can do, wired to go wireless on a bigger network, or for networked DMX. So let's dive in. So in front of me here, I've got all this various gear, and I want to run through a few really basic scenarios that will work well. Okay, the first is the simple wireless control scenario. The simple wireless control scenario is really just as simple as grabbing a simple travel router, or really any consumer router that you find. If it has 5 gigahertz, that's good, helps in more congested environments. But, overall, bigger antennas will go further in good, decent-sized rooms. Honestly, I've used this up to hundreds of feet away, and it's typically fine. So we'll just connect that up here to any of the normal ports on this router, okay, this consumer router type, and plug that into the LightShark itself, okay? And then from a physical standpoint, that's all you need. Those two items plugged together, console or tablet here to connect to your console. Now, what are some things to look out for in a situation like this? This type of approach will work. It'll work on the LightShark, it'll work with a computer, it'll work with Onyx. This isn't LightShark specific, it works on any console. But a couple things are going to happen here. Okay, the first is that your router is going to hand out IP addresses to the items if they're set in DHCP mode. If the device you're using, whatever software you're contacting your console with, it's offline editor, it's, touch OSC, whatever, if that software doesn't require you to input the IP address every time of that console, if it can just find it on the network, like the Onyx iOS app, for example, then just leave everything in DHCP and it'll just work fine. They'll change IP addresses from time to time, but it won't matter. Okay? If you have devices, we talked about this in the last video, if you have software, like for example the LightShark software, you typically type in the IP address of the console into your web browser on your tablet to get to the console, okay? So in that case, you would want to set that up static. You would want to disable DHCP on the device and preferably on the router, but as long as you don't use like the first couple IP addresses, you won't run into anything the router's trying to assign to, and you'll be good to go. So you could set the console to 192.168.0.100. The router is 192.168.0.1. They can talk to each other, but there's no conflict. This hops on, and the router assigns it. A lot of times these will default the range to 192.168.0.2 and onward. And so this one gets .2. You could, in your router with mobile devices, if you have to put into this console software the mobile device's IP address, like for Touch OSC, then what I would do for that is, if you can set it static on your mobile device, do that. If you want to take your mobile device home, put it on different networks, and that causes issues, then I would go ahead and reserve in your router the IP address for the tablet and for the console. And that basically keeps DHCP on, but the router locks in that device based on its MAC address. That's like a serial number, like an ID for the device that doesn't change. And it locks that in and reserves that IP address. Every router's different in how it does that. It's just a way to keep things simpler. So that's the simplest network layout. What if you want to do some networked DMX? Okay, this doesn't get too much more complicated. So get these all together, And if we're doing, wireless control and network DMX, then just use this router combo for most simple shows, okay? And go get your DMX node, which don't have one within reach right now, so we will use this switch as the DMX node, okay? And you just get yourself another network cable. So we'll go find one of those. And plug that in as well. Plug that into the network. Of course, wires would probably be longer in real life. And now we've got our DMX node here, ready to spit out DMX, connected to the router, static IP address typically, so that you can tell the console a lot of times where the node is, what IP address it is to send that data, and it's going to flow through. The only thing to watch out about here that I didn't mention yet is on these router type devices, there's typically one plug. This one has a little whorl on it. A lot of times it's different colored, where that's for connecting, that's for reaching out to a network, to an open internet network, to a wide area network, a WAN, okay? So don't use that plug because it won't work for other devices that are together locally, but it will work for connecting to those larger networks. A lot of times for show networks, you really don't need to get much more complicated than this. If you do need to be on a larger network, the principles are the same. It's just that you have to be aware of the other traffic and if the protocols you're sending on that network are compatible with the protocols that are already on that network. For example, ArtNet and Internet sometimes have problems together. I believe Dante and AVB, I believe one of them can work with other devices. I think it's AVB, but Dante, the audio protocol, has to be on its own network, I think. Not an audio guy. The third and final demonstration here, just to show you, is if you were to go and have a simple network switch. So instead of a router, we switch this out for a network switch, such as this. And now we want to go ahead and connect just a console to that network switch to a DMX node, which I guess this will be now, okay? And if you want to do that, it's really as simple as hooking them all up. So the node, the switch, the console, hook them all up together with the switch, set static IP addresses. Ranges for those, just make sure all the IP addresses are different. A lot of times people will use 10.IP addresses like 10.0.0.1, 10.0.0.2.3.4. That's a good one for computer-to-computer networks. Really, on a technical basis, if you're never going to connect it to a larger network, you could use almost any IP address range. Just being aware that some devices will not let you use the same format on two interfaces. What I mean by that is if you have a computer that then tries to connect into this network with this basic node and console, and it's also on Wi-Fi, most of the time computers are okay with this, but I know some small microcomputers and stuff can't do Wi-Fi on 192.168.0.x and do wired on that same range because they don't know where to send the traffic. Okay, but other than that, it really doesn't get more complicated than that. If you just got to send data, boom, like we said, networked ArtNet, SACN, simple network switch, static IP addresses for the node and the console, done. Okay, same with the computer, done. If you need wireless control, get yourself a small router or connect to a facilities network. And if you can keep that separate from your DMX data, a lot of times that makes sense too. That's more application specific, and I can't generally say in a video like, oh, always do this, always do that. With SACN, it's generally fine. With ArtNet, sometimes it's not. Okay, if you just need wireless control, take your device, your console, your computer, whatever, plug it into a basic consumer router. If you feel like you need to go, extra far or you have signal strength problems, then go buy, a $100 highly rated router. The thing I see most about this stuff is people post all the time and they're like, what router should I buy? What router is that, David? What router is this? And if you just go to Amazon or wherever you're going to shop and just look at routers, because the technology and the models change constantly, and just look at you know, say for $100, $50, I mean a $30 router. I run my Christmas light show on like a $20 router. It's old too. And it hands everything fine because it's not a lot of data. But, you know, so depending on how far you got to throw the signal, etc., you know, if you buy a $100 router and you take good care of it and you don't break the antennas off, that's typically going to work great for you for a lot of situations. If you're in a larger facility, you might have a more complicated network. It might make sense to just put your wireless control on that bigger network, keep any DMX distribution as a separate network, and just have 2 network ports on your console, like the Onyx consoles and others have those, etc. Use a computer with 2 network cards, etc. Okay, I don't want to overcomplicate this and get too much in the weeds because I want to wrap this up and just, you know, give you these basics that a simple network for stage lighting doesn't have to be complicated. And I hope in this video you've learned that and learned the basics of putting it together and that you're not overwhelmed. If you're not overwhelmed, hit a big thumbs up, subscribe here, and be sure to join us in our next video where we're going to look at a big show. I'm going to pull up a Super Bowl or something. I'm going to pull up the drawings of it and walk you through what they do for networking and show you how it's not that much different than what we did here today. That's right. We'll see you guys there. Thanks.